Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sasha Ramirez-Hughes, the OECD Education and Skills Communications Manager. Today's conversation is a hot one. Last year was the hottest year on record, and this is no surprise because the previous 9 years were also the hottest years on record. Last year was probably also the first year that we've passed the 1.5-degree limit set out in the Paris Agreement. What does this look like? Massive weather events, hurricanes, heat stress in Europe, drought in the Amazon, and of course, fires like the ones we're seeing in LA today. But the battle isn't over. There still are reasons to be hopeful, maybe optimistic. I'll let Owen judge whether optimistic or hopeful is the right word. Renewable energy is surging, EV sales are rising, and deforest in the Amazon is falling. We also know that people care about climate change. They want to do more. But one of the barriers to prevent them from this is skills. What kind of skills do people need to take climate action, to become climate leaders? How can we support these skills? How can we develop the policies from governments that help people develop the skills that they need in education and throughout the life cycle? How can we also ensure that those skills help people in their own lives, not just to become climate activists, but to use them in their jobs and in their day-to-day lives? Well, today I think we're going to shed some real light on this topic, and I'm really pleased that we have such a great panel of experts with us today. We have Owen Gaffney, who's the Chief Impact Officer for Nobel Prize Outreach and the co-lead of Earth for All. We have Aideen Gallagher, who's the Senior Leader for Climate Action and Sustainable Development with OID, the Department for Education Support Service for Teachers in Ireland. We have Deborah Nushi, my colleague, who's a Senior Analyst in the Education Policies for a Sustainable Future project at the OECD. And apologies from Rad Boudem, who was going to join us today. He's the Director of Higher Education and Student Finance at the Ministry of Education in the Netherlands, but unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. So we're going to start the conversation in a moment, but I first want to introduce Deborah, who's going to set the scene and tell us about a new report that the OECD is launching today. But before I turn to you, Deborah, thanks to everyone who's joined us online. We have hundreds of people joining us from around the world. Please don't forget to post your questions in the chat if you have any questions for our panelists, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Deborah, over to you.
Thank you, Sasha. Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to be launching this report today. This report was co-authored with my colleague François Stering here at the OECD's Directorate for Education and Skills, and our colleagues Marcia Rocha and Kian Montag from the OECD's Environment Directorate. So the idea was to bring together expertise on climate science and on education and skills policies. And beyond that, we also drew on insights from various sectors of the OECD, and including from our colleagues in energy, economics, governance, development cooperation, employment, labor, and social affairs. So what mattered to us was to situate the role of education and skills policies within its wider policy context. And the idea was to integrate those different perspectives from different sectors, hoping that then our efforts in education are coherent with and supported by other critical areas. Unfortunately, my slides aren't moving. So, here we go. Great. So the report, starting from this climate science perspective, reminds us that the planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are not isolated problems. They are systemic issues that are, in fact, deeply rooted in the way that we structure our economies and our societies. Climate change, for example, is driven by emissions from multiple sectors, including energy systems, industry, agriculture, transport, and buildings. And these emissions are still rising despite global policy efforts. Biodiversity loss and pollution also stem from unsustainable practices in these and other sectors. So addressing these issues requires transformations in each of the sectors, but also thinking about how they are interconnected and thinking about the underlying structures, relationships across those sectors. It also requires us to think systemically about change. How does change happen in a society? Systems thinking approaches are based on an understanding that social, economic, ecological, and other systems interact, and that change needs to happen at those various levels. So policy changes can create frameworks and incentives for economic transformation, for sustainable behavior. But in turn, social norms and behaviors can influence policies and markets. And technological innovation can influence and enable those new solutions in all of these areas. So I think starting from this bigger picture can help us better situate the role that education and training policies can play in climate action. The science is also very clear about that the time window that we have for making those changes is very narrow, and that key transformations must happen in this current decade to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. Some of the effects of climate change are already baked into the system and are now unavoidable. And we also know that changes in Earth systems can be abrupt and non-linear, and that there may be cascading effects across Earth systems when climate tipping points are being crossed. So in this uncertain environment, strategic foresight, adaptation, and resilience are also key for climate responses. So this report focuses on the role of education and skills policies within that. And it basically proposes two avenues through which education and skills policies can contribute to effective climate action. One is through fostering agency for socio-behavioral change. And the second one is developing skills for the green transition. And in the presentation, we will look at each of these areas in turn. So first, fostering citizen agency is at the heart of the report. Agency is about the ability of individuals to make informed decisions to positively shape their own lives and the world around them. But this agency can take different forms and is important for education and skills policies to keep those different types of agency on their radar. At its most basic level, agency is about learners understanding themselves as decision makers in their own context. That is enabling them to understand complex information, understand evidence, and make informed choices, for example, in their own consumption and in their lifestyles. But at a more mature level, agency is about being able to situate one's own actions with the broader changes that are necessary to give sense to our individual pursuits. So it's about engaging with climate change as a collective action problem. And this engagement can take so many forms. It can be through voting, community initiatives, civil society engagement, protesting, citizen assemblies, you name it, legal action, campaigns. And then there's a third type of agency that we often look at separately, but that I think is also very much part of this, which is the ability to make informed career choices. That is to link one's own values and ambitions in sustainability to the career pathways that we pursue. So it's about also taking advantage of the opportunities that the green transition offers rather than being tossed around by the change and being powerless in the face of change. The report finds that there are a number of obstacles that may inhibit people from exercising their agency. One of them may be a lack of hope or trust in leadership, trust in governments. On the positive side, there are many indicators that awareness of climate challenges is very high and that there's a great sense of urgency among citizens. Over 70% of adults in G20 countries think that the world should take urgent action to address climate change. And among young people in the OECD's PISA study, over 80% reported being highly familiar, strongly aware of climate challenges. But the latest trust survey of the OECD shows that people's trust in their governments is in actually being able to solve complex problems is declining. The survey found that only 39% of respondents said that they trusted their governments, and only 37% were confident that the government was able to balance the interests of current and future generation. Also, while awareness of the climate challenge is high, and that's not surprising given how present it is in the media as well, when we look at the actual understanding that people have of sustainability challenges, the picture is less positive. And we do need, I think, greater focus on learning about solutions and innovations and what can be done in different sectors and different levels. In 2018, in the OECD's PISA study, there were a couple of sustainability items that tested the more systemic issues around climate change. And results showed that on average across countries and test units, less than 50% of students were able to answer those items correctly. This data is, as I said, is from 2018, so it's now a little bit dated. And PISA 2025 will collect new data on student scientific literacy. So I think there's hope that the results will be better because a lot has happened in education in the past few years. But what is also very concerning is the data that we have about the adult populations. And here also surveys show that in the general adult population, there are widespread misconceptions still around the causes and and potential solutions to climate change. We have a study, the European Social Survey, round 8, which showed that only 46% of older adults over 25-year-old, identify human activity as the primary cause of climate change. And a recent Ipsos survey in 30 countries showed that the majority of respondents were unable to identify which behaviors were most effective for them to reduce their own carbon footprints. And on average, a majority of participants actually ranked low impact actions as more important than higher impact actions. So for example, actions such as switching to low energy light bulbs or recycling were seen as very effective ways to reducing one's own carbon footprint, rather than high impact actions such as reducing air travel or shifting to a plant-based diet. So still a lot of confusion, I think, even among people who are well-intentioned and who would like to change their behaviors about what actually makes a difference and what the evidence is around different solutions at the individual level, and then of course at the systemic level. So what can education and training policies do to foster sustainability competencies, to foster understanding of those challenges and build the competencies that people need to take action? Given the urgency of the climate crisis, the report highlights how important it is for learning about sustainability to be mainstreamed across all levels of education. So not just for children, but crucially also for adults. In the 2023 OECD survey of the Education Policy Outlook, we saw that 94% of OECD education systems in the survey saw sustainability as a priority for school education, but only 50% saw it as a priority for adult education. And this strong focus on school education is a good thing, of course, because that's the level where education is universal, where we can reach the entire student population in that generation. There also, we know there are often spillover effects where the learning of young people also spreads to their families. So this is very important, but it's not enough, because the vocational higher and adult education are those core providers of advanced knowledge and skills to societies, and adding a focus on sustainability here will be crucial to cultivating citizens and workers that can actually accelerate the green transition. So achieving this would require a focus on all these levels on scientific and systems thinking, and in particular, understanding those interrelationships, close interrelationships between social and ecological systems, basically understanding that humans are part of nature. And then it involves aligning those sustainability values and the sustainability knowledge to action and understanding the solutions. In terms of the policy areas that can help us achieve this, the report offers 3 main areas for policy. One is, of course, an obvious area is curriculum reform, which allows to embed a sustainability lens across different levels of education. And here governments can foster collaboration across key stakeholders in order to map out how sustainability is embedded at different levels of education. As I said, at school education, almost universally, countries feature this as a cross-curricular learning goal, but there are huge differences as to whether it's just that cross-curricular goal with a lack of clarity of where it should be introduced, whether countries embed it in particular subject curricula, or some countries are pioneering a specific subject just around climate action and sustainability. So there's lots of room for peer learning. And again, the situation is a lot more patchy in the post-secondary sectors than in school education. So governments can also help through this mapping to ensure coherence and progressions, to see that there are in fact increasing levels of complexity as students move from primary to secondary to post-secondary learning. It's also important, secondly, to keep in mind that the learning is not just for students, but if we want to achieve this transformative change, there need to be learning opportunities for those who teach them, teachers, trainers, educational leaders. And professional learning opportunities are really important, because this is a field where knowledge is also developing, advancing very rapidly. So a field where it's not enough to just front-loading professional learning in the initial teacher education, but it needs to be something that happens throughout teachers' professional life. We know that the forms of professional learning that are typically most effective are those that happen in professional learning communities, where teachers work with each other, they network, they work across their individual subjects to create something greater, have a focus on interdisciplinary learning here. And a third policy area that is connected to that is actually anchoring that type of professional learning and these curricula in specific places and partnerships. Place-based approaches allow institutions to connect with local community actors, and they can support inclusion of different communities, different groups in the community, foster inquiry, experiential and project-based learning. And here again, the role of governments is to support these practices by bringing them to scale, offering the guidance and incentives. Many countries have kind of green labeling programs where they give a label to the school, offer support, offer networking resources, etc. So anchoring in places helps making this learning concrete and building the applied skills that we are looking for. And the ambition for these holistic approaches would then be to build the agency, not just at the level of students, but of all those educators and partners who are involved in the project. So to build capacity in the civil society as well. Now, moving to the second part of the presentation, from agency and citizenship to skills and employment in the sectors that are crucial to advancing the green transition of our economies. So we know that, in fact, the policies that countries are adopting to reach net zero have already reshaped local labor markets and are projected to do so ever more. So with the green transition, we see a job decline in polluting sectors, and skills that are specific to those high emission sectors are becoming outdated. We see job growth in green industries, such as the renewable energy sectors, of course, and we have skills and labor shortages projected in these areas. But also very important, many existing occupations are being transformed that are neither in green or polluting sectors, but they adapt to sustainability imperatives. So there are new job types emerging with the green transition. In terms of the skills that are needed for individuals to adapt to these changing labor markets, the OECD's employment outlook found that the green transition will, of course, have major implication for specific sectors and the specific regions where these sectors are located. So building up the specific technical skills for specialized tasks like machine operating, etc., in these areas will be essential for workers to adapt and for the green transition to advance. But the report stated that perhaps more importantly or more universally important is the need for all workers to develop higher levels of so-called transversal skills. So these are the skills that are important for the knowledge economy in general, that are important to be able to function in an increasingly volatile, complex society and labor market, such as strong literacy and numeracy skills, digital skills, critical thinking, critical analysis, creativity, working with others, collaboration, communication, socio-emotional skills, as well as a focus on problem solving, entrepreneurship, and so on. So these transversal skills sound familiar. They are not new. Many education systems have been focusing on them for several decades already. But the analysis shows that in the green-driven employment opportunities, higher levels of those skills are required, and it's really key for education systems to focus on them. While they are crucial for the green economy, these skills are not intrinsically green. So at the OECD, we avoid speaking about green skills. They are transversal skills that could be employed either for green sectors or in polluting sectors. What makes the difference is probably the values and the attitudes that people have and the wish that they have to employ them in sustainable sectors. And this is why it's so important to also embed across sectors this focus on sustainability competencies that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The green transition also raises important equity questions. The analysis finds that green-driven occupations offer excellent opportunities for highly educated, highly skilled workers, mostly in urban areas. But the conditions in green-driven jobs for low-skilled workers tend to be less attractive compared to other low-skill occupations. So the less educated and less skilled actually have more to lose in the green transition and perhaps less to gain as it currently looks. So ensuring a just transition, one that is inclusive and fair, requires measures that go well beyond the education sector. including measures to enhance the quality of green-driven employment, especially for low-skill jobs. But of course, it also requires changes in the education and training sector. We know that currently only about 40% of adults participate in formal or non-formal learning for job-related reasons, and that workers in high emissions occupations tend to train less than other workers. So for education and skills policies to foster the right skills for the green transition, the report proposes three main areas for policy development. One is around strengthening skills assessment and anticipation. So this is about adapting national skills strategies and considering the likely impact of net zero targets and environmental policies on labor market. It's really important to actually integrate that in skills anticipation in order to identify what skills will be needed in the future. And governments can support these processes by ensuring broad stakeholder involvement and tailoring approaches to regional contexts. A second important area is career guidance. So having a sustainability focus in career guidance can empower individuals to actually transform the motivation that they have to act into sustainable careers, and they can connect those educational pathways with broader social goals, and support workers who are transitioning out of declining industries towards other jobs in green sectors. And the third big area of policies is around developing a coherent skills delivery landscape in post-secondary education. And the report offers quite detailed recommendations in this field. In a nutshell, they are around adapting the initial program offers to the changing skills needs of the green transition. Secondly, very importantly, about expanding upskilling and reskilling opportunities. And this involves both expanding the lifelong learning offer that we have in vocational education training and higher education, actually giving those institutions a clearer mandate for adult education and for continuous upskilling and reskilling. And on the other hand, removing the barriers that these populations have to participation. There may be financial barriers, there may be issues of not having the right information, there may be geographical barriers as to where this training is provided, there may be barriers in terms of the modalities of delivery, that for adult learners, you need a lot more flexibility. Microcredits can be extremely helpful in having the learning chunked to a size that is manageable for people who are also working, et cetera, et cetera. So really having a focus on what is needed on the supply side and what is needed to remove those many barriers that people face to participate. And then there is a third big area of policy, which is around having more of a common vision for the different educational actors in the post-secondary field, vocational, higher education, non-formal and informal opportunities, because as we've seen, what is needed really is higher skills levels for everyone in the population. So this is about offering better pathways for those who have a technical education to further upskill. And it is about building these collaborations at the regional level, not just between institutions that offer technical education and higher education, but also very crucially the employers in those regions, the private sector, the regional and local government, bringing those actors together in order to map out what skills are needed and what kinds of programs can deliver those skills to the regional population. So with this, I hope I gave you a flavor of what is in the report, and I hope I made you curious to actually go and read the report, which is now available on our website, and you have the link to access it in the chat. Thank you so very much for listening.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Deborah. That was a really thorough and fascinating introduction to the subject. A lot, I think, to unpack there. I really like the fact that you point out that, climate change is happening. We have to deal with it. We still have to do what we can to reduce emissions further. And so there's a lot to be done on the skills front to achieve these things. And thanks also for picking up on really emphasizing the point that this is not just about primary and secondary education. Adult skills upskilling is really, really important. And I've already seen a lot of comments in the chat about this issue. about how we can leverage vet and other training for the adult population as well. And also, thanks for bringing up teacher professional learning. Looking forward to hearing more from Aiden about this because she's the expert. But let's open it up now to the panel discussion. I think we have a lot of questions and a lot of things to discuss. And again, if anyone from the audience has any questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. So Owen, let's start with you. I think if there's one thing that we can really take away from Deborah's presentation, it's this issue of agency. Informed citizens is good. We also need citizens that are taking action, that are working for change. So, why do you think the skills approach is actually a good approach for this? And how is the Nobel Prize Foundation working on this issue?
Right. So hi Sasha, and thank you for the invitation to join you all today, and thanks Deborah for the great presentation. Yes, so and in the report it cites some of the work we're doing at Nobel. We see when you talk to Nobel laureates about their journeys, how do they end up where they are today? Critical thinking skills, creativity, these issues come up so strongly over and over again. And so we've been really, really focused on, well, how do we engage more in the education sector around critical thinking skills? And I see, it's really highlighted prominently in the report. We've set up a project with Saul Perlmutter, who won the Nobel Physics Prize back in 2011 for his work on discovering that the universe is not only expanding, but it's accelerating, how fast it's expanding. But he's been absolutely obsessed for the last decade on critical thinking in schools and at universities, and building a course around that. So we've been helping with him on that to build a full the most comprehensive curriculum on critical thinking to date, and that'll be finalized later this year. We've got the 2 or 3 units already published. The full suite will be available. But this, and we want to create a gold standard for critical thinking, and to push that discussion worldwide with OECD, with UNESCO, and others on how we think about critical thinking, and how we give the scientific thinking skills, the thinking skills scientists learn, how they can be appropriate for everybody to make sense of this world, which I think is a critical skill for this as we go through this huge transformation in society, as the global economy transforms, and as social media, AI, etc., become more prevalent. We need to be able to better pass information, to understand fact from fiction.
Thanks, Owen. So, can we expand on that a little bit? I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, this issue of critical thinking, and especially how it confronts a world that is really changing rapidly in terms of technology, how social media, I mean, in many respects, is becoming kind of less fact-based, or it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish fact from fiction. I mean, how are you in your own work? I mean, how have you confronted this? How have you seen this manifest? Do you see that? Or is it your experience that people are becoming less able to think critically these days? Do you see a kind of deficit in the way people are learning these things? And how are some of the ways that you actually can develop those skills and those values to actually do those things?
Yeah, I mean, without doubt. I mean, I think, we're seeing a more polarized world. Social media is contributing to that. It's not the only cause of it, but it's certainly a contribution. And we're seeing pullback from democracy and democratic values, which is concerning for everybody. So, part of the reason for that is fiction, fake news travels so much faster than facts in society and through social media channels. So how do we address that? And this is why we've created this course, but we've also been working with Nobel Prize. We've been doing a series of events worldwide on the future of democracy and the future of decision making, etc., to bring Nobel laureates together to talk about these issues and raise the profile of the issue worldwide. Because if we value democracy, we have to make progress on this. If we need to strengthen democracies if we're going to make progress on climate change and sustainability issues. Generally, people need to engage, across generations, across the world. We need to find new ways of cooperation, etc. And that requires new skills to do that. And so that's the rationale for our work here.
Thanks so much, Owen. Looking forward to coming back to some of those issues that you raised on what these new skills look like and how people can use them. But let's turn to Aideen now. I mean, Aideen, I know Ireland is actually a good example of a country that's working to actually develop those skills and has concrete ideas about how to do that. So tell us about Ireland's new course on climate action and sustainable development. Tell us about it. What is Ireland trying to achieve with this course?
Fantastic. Thank you, Seth. And hello, everybody. And can I just say, what a privilege it is to be here today. And I'm looking at the chat. We've colleagues from Colombia and Cyprus and just everywhere across the world. So how exciting, what a privilege. Thank you for the invitation here today. Just to explain to everyone, there is a brand new subject there in Ireland in the senior cycle curriculum. Over the last number of years, there has been a lot of educational reform take place in Ireland. And, just in terms of what Deborah spoke there, you spoke, Deborah, about sometimes it can be one subject alone, or sometimes it can be threaded right through. And I think Ireland is a good example of the latter, because both at junior cycle education, where sustainability is threaded through as an element of a lot of the new revised specifications across a wide number of subject areas. Also, at senior cycle, we do have a dedicated subject. So I suppose we have a little bit of a hybrid model in Ireland, and it is definitely identified as a high priority. There were only 2 brand new subjects introduced at senior cycle within the last year or 2, drama, film and theatre studies, and climate action and sustainable development. Now, the final specification was just signed off by the Minister last September. And we have a link, which I know, Sasha, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, will pop that link into the chat. I'm guessing a lot of people on the call won't have really seen or read, the specification yet, but I can promise you that it aligns extremely well into everything that Deborah spoke about today, everything in this report, and also what Owen has spoken to in relation to the Nobel Area 2. So it aligns very, very well. We have a whole list of senior cycle key competencies, which include critical thinking. And when I think of the critical thinking, Owen, when you were speaking there, I was reminded of part of our specification, which refers to greenwashing. And the importance of a student or an adult or anyone being able to distinguish, have a critical eye on what is often marketed as very climate friendly, etc. So the specification has gone into the chat there now. Thank you. I can see that it's been added. I would encourage you to look through it. With 4 strands, it's very comprehensive. Strand 1 is, I suppose, very much about the science. Strand 2, people, power and place. Strand 3, global connections. And strand 4, the applied learning tasks. We're trying to, I suppose, instill in these students definitely a sense of hope and efficacy too, because one thing we're very mindful of, and it's mentioned there in terms of the effective dimension, is the can-do approach, not that they would become overwhelmed, that there would be that sense of hope, that resilience. Definitely we're all ears for new ideas, these new solutions that students have in terms of just transitions. And I suppose for a long, long time, every time a country gained in wealth, that was often at the expense of the environment. So we're trying to come up with solution focused mindset for decoupling, I suppose, those 2 activities, so that we can still very much succeed and progress economically, but not at the expense of the environment. The spec is very, very comprehensive and took about 2 years to draft together, and there were lots of submissions on it. We are absolutely floored by the enthusiasm of teachers in this area, and teachers had to, really apply to be one of the first schools to lead out in it. And we have 43 schools that were selected by the Minister to lead out in that. And we're working with those schools this year in advance of the students starting in 5th year. So they'd been in around the age 16, 17-year-olds and the last 2 years of their Leaving Certificate education. And again, just things that Deborah mentioned there, the opportunities this will open for them in future, in careers. They are so enthusiastic about it. And action is there mentioned in the name of the subject, climate action, sustainable development. We're trying to encourage them to identify what is good action, what may not be good action, why so, etc. But I mean, I just think I had a few little notes jotted down when you were speaking as well, Deborah, and I really just see how well it aligns and the skills, the employment, and again, just to reiterate that sense of hope. That's something we definitely want to thread in with these young people and the resilience to give them that it's not all a bad news story, it's a good news story. Yeah, and that they are part of they are the solution, and we're all ears in terms of what their ideas for action will be.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Yes, I love the emphasis on hope, on optimism, on agency. So, if I'm a young person or I'm taking the senior course, you're not necessarily training me to be an activist, but to see how I can affect change in my own life in whatever I do for sustainability. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's kind of an approach of think global but act local. And how important those small steps are, how important it is to identify good action. We have to be a little bit careful, I suppose, in the subject space that these students are still quite young, 16, 17, maybe 18 years of age. And we have to make sure that the action they take is very safe and that they're protected and all that goes with that in terms of whether this is online or face to face. But to identify, they research other actions and they do an action project on this as well. And it's worth 40% of their final score. So them being active, independent, I suppose they're not passive in the subject. They're very much active learners in every shape and sense of that term. And I really believe that they will come out after the 2 years at senior cycle being much more informed, having learned through experience. It's very experiential too. And they are involved in a number of projects, including one big one, over the course of the 2 years, but other smaller ones as well as they go along. So it's very much what can we do? How can we do it? Looking at things that other people have done and identifying what worked well, what didn't, and I suppose learning from that. But the terminology and the specification, what I love about it is it's so up to date. Now, I love the whole area of climatology, geomorphology. They were my areas I kept selecting in college. And we had the wonderful Professor Sweeney in NUI Maynooth in Ireland was my lecturer and instilled a huge enthusiasm for us. And I thought I was, fairly up to date in this area. But when this new specification was published, there are new terms like the donut economies, all the new terms that are evolving all the time, and they're all in there. So if you look through each of the 4 strands and the learning outcomes, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised in terms of the depth, the wealth of knowledge, the amount that's covered. In actual fact, in some of our collaborative events, our community practice type events, we have one upcoming next week. We meet these teachers online and together we explore some of these terms that are new to us as well, and we come up with shared definitions. So we are learning as much as the students, and I suppose we are also going to be taught by the students. So it's very much the whole approach in Ireland in education has changed over the last decade, I suppose. It has been reformed and it's very much active learning, student-led, independent, critical thinking, and student voice, student agency, all the things that everyone has spoken about today.
That's wonderful. No better way to teach than to actually empower them to try things out, to learn through experience, to fail, to have those experiences which are really, really hammer the message home and show them what it's really like. So I want to come back to that because I think this is something that has come up in the chat. I know Joe Williams is asking about, raising awareness is one thing, but actually moving awareness to action is another. And I think, Ideen, that's something that you'd mentioned, and that's why you have an action-based approach to this course. But I'm curious to hear from Owen as well, on this kind of the gulf between being informed and actually taking action. Is there something from Nobel Prize Foundation's work, Owen, from your side, where you're experiencing that as well, that, it's not only enough to actually inform people about those things, but actually to get them to take change, to take action? Is there something that in your own work where you're confronting that, and how you're addressing those issues?
Yeah. So I published a book a couple of years ago, Earth for All, where we look at the kind of systemic transformations that society needs. And in it, we outlined, two scenarios: the too little, too late scenario, the scenario we're on today, and a giant leap scenario, and articulating, much as Deborah did in the opening talk, this huge transformation needed this decade. And it is, a mixture of individual agency, based on a sort of understanding of the issues, but also societal action. We need both of those at scale. People can go so far with their own actions, but they really need to. But then you need, the systemic changes that only governments can drive through. But there again, individual agency comes through voting in democratic systems, which is why we really need to protect and enhance democracies, so that they are working for the majority of people, not just for the wealthy elite, and which is the issue today. And I mean, so on that, I would say, mentioned earlier, we're seeing this pullback from democracy around the world. We're seeing sort of a rise of populists, and a lot of those populist leaders are talking about, they're going to transform. They want to, major government reforms, and they're getting votes based on that need for transformation, because people realize there's some huge issues, and want transformation and want more accountability. So I think, that's part of the agency. I think on the political side, politicians need to be braver in putting out more transformative policies that are fair and just, and benefit the majority of people, not just the minority, to put that out as an agenda for voters. So it's that mixture. I think it's individual, but it's also the societal.
Thanks so much, Owen, and thanks for bringing up your book, Earth for All. I think it's a great read. Highly recommend everyone in this webinar to read it. And I do want to come back to something in your book a little bit later on. But Deborah, to close on this first part, I do want to ask about transversal skills, because this is something that you mentioned in your presentation. It's easy when we talk about skills to talk about building more wind turbine technicians, or, EV technicians or whatever. But, transversal skills can be used for sustainability. They can be used for the good of the climate. They can also be used for the bad of the climate. So when we're talking about transversal skills like critical thinking, numeracy, how can we actually ensure that they lead to more sustainable practices and not less?
Sorry, I was mute again. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah.
I was saying that it partly depends on labor market opportunities. I think if those jobs in the green sector, they are attractive jobs that offer good conditions to people, then there's no reason why they wouldn't be choosing those jobs when they have the higher levels of skills that they can go into those jobs. I also think that career guidance plays an important role here. People may often not have the information as to which jobs are available, what kinds of new sustainability roles we have in all sectors of society. Because when we think of green-driven jobs, we often think of engineering and these kinds of fields. But increasingly, in any sector, in the legal field, in public policy, everywhere there are roles that require an attention to sustainability, and solutions can be developed at different levels. And I saw in the chat also someone mentioning, why don't we focus on the humanities and the arts and so on? And that is true as well. In any sector, you can use your skills for different purposes. So it depends, I think, on the values and attitudes that you bring to that. And that's why it's important that we also embed those skills across different educational programs, that we build attention, understanding of what sustainability is, and help people develop those values. And based on that, I think they will choose to employ their skills for the benefit of those values and goals.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Absolutely. I think it's such an important point. Aideen, you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting, but it was just really, I suppose, what Owen spoke to there and Deborah, and it was really, really interesting to hear that. I suppose going back to the question in terms of you can have the information, you can have curriculum specifications, and thanks to everyone actually for the comments in the chats, and I'm reading there about Scotland, and I'm reading all of the little messages that have my name in them as well, so thank you. It's interesting to get that insight. But yeah, you can have I suppose the subject matter, you can have specifications, and then Owen mentioned the political will, I suppose, which is I've often heard that being referred to as a renewable resource. But and all of that area in terms of politics, the curriculum. And I think, and I suppose I would relate this to my own years of teaching this age group in my own school, Malahide Community School, whereby the students would often say to me, oh, Miss Gallagher, you're always talking about global warming and climatology and greenhouse effect and all the rest. And I went to New York the weekend. We live right beside the airport, and some of the students have parents who are pilots, and they head off to New York and all these places. And they may mention other jurisdictions, maybe America, maybe other places, they'll say, but I noticed they weren't recycling over there as much, or the cars were bigger, or the engines are bigger, or there was less, maybe they felt from their perspective, of a climate agenda. And it would come back to the classroom where we'd say, really, this is, I suppose, always a moral issue as well, an ethical and moral. So I nearly see it as three intersecting circles. I suppose the knowledge, the learning, the being inspired about it from a young age, and being there, the political piece, huge, and the parts that Deborah spoke about. But I do think if we can inspire that in the young people, that moral or that ethical, which they really have, and we are mesmerized by how engaged they are, how on side, how on task, how much they genuinely care. I think the three of them together is almost a little bit of a magic wand to make things happen, I suppose. So it just occurred to me as people were speaking, just from my own, having had to field those questions many times. Oh, why should I care if they don't care, or he doesn't care, or that place? We care because it's the right thing to do, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much. But let me pick up on that. And I realize I haven't been doing a good job of timekeeping. We only have 12 minutes left, so I think we'll have to be concise from now onward. But I do want to ask you about this issue about caring, because it's one thing to give young people the skills to go out there, or adults to give them the skills to go out there and affect change. But we also have to. These people also work. I mean, they also have to make a living. And so, how do you square these with the business needs of people, the needs of the business community? For example, in Ireland, I mean, did the business community have a role to say in how this climate course would be shaped? Have you had any input? Is there any sort of engagement on those kind of things?
Yeah, there was a very thorough consultation process that ran at many levels. It ran publicly. So the NCCA are the agency in Ireland that developed these curriculum specifications. And the NCCA, go through a very, very thorough submission process, and anyone can submit on that. And even, I mean, I would be very aware of the teachers and the students and the focus groups amongst educational partners that have submitted their thoughts and their feelings on specification. But over the last 12 months, I've been floored by speaking to other people that were asked to make submissions. Like, it was only by accident when we're doing the webinar with John Sweeney there before Christmas, Professor John Sweeney, that he mentioned himself and another colleague from Trinity College in Dublin had been asked to give submissions. And I suppose within the public sector, there would be a big drive, a huge drive on sustainability in general. And so I see it as a joined up thinking process. And I can see that was mentioned in the chat as well. And people are asking questions about that. So it's not just within, education, it's a governmental. And I mean, there's lots of government sites and you just have to type in sustainability. And I myself, I suppose in my own role, linked in with other partners on this. Like part of our slides included the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. I was able to link in with another government department in terms of the badges, the teachers, we're inquiring, we linked in with them. Even within parts of our days, we have these residential programs because it's seen as such, I suppose, a high priority area, and I know it's definitely a really important part of the reformed curriculum, that teachers are getting extra training in this that they may not have got in all subjects before. And in that as well, I suppose part of our days we've been able to include little short snippet video clips, and it could be the Department of the Marine, it could be a business, a corporate, but it is I suppose it's showing the breadth and the wide spectrum that exists in terms of everyone being on the same page, essentially. We are all on the same page. And I think students absorb that. And maybe that's the reason why they're so on side. I just compare it to my own generation, I suppose, and I am just definitely taken aback and inspired by the students. We had artwork designed by some students about this specification, and it was phenomenal. What they come up with, they were just asked to read the rationale part of the specification and come up with images to capture what it means for them. I mean, and I could find them very quickly and show them to you, and I could share my screen if you want, but they were just excellent what they come up with. So I do think that, yes, Sean, it's a joined up thinking, business, corporate, public sector, private sector. And in terms of the world of work, which you mentioned and Deborah mentioned, I see it as a big area in terms of economic growth. And I think that the real thing is to not, some people would view this as, oh, if I care about the climate agenda, I'm going to have less money in my pocket. And in actual fact, can you afford to not care about it, should be the question. And in doing so, it doesn't mean that you can't go from A to B or you can't enjoy this, that, and the other. It's just to think of new and innovative and creative solutions around that.
Exactly right. Thanks so much, Aideen. Owen, I want to come back to you because, we focus a lot on the consumer or the citizen or the young person when we talk about skills, but it's actually those that are in the positions of power who have the biggest impact, but they're often the hardest to reach. So is any of your work in the Nobel Prize Foundation or in any of your own thinking, how can we target those individuals? How can we engage them in these conversations as well?
Yeah, so, but I do, I do think that what we're talking about with this broader agenda is, people want purpose in their life, people want meaning in their jobs, and and the climate challenge is the stability of the planet is everybody's responsibility. This generation, we're the last generation that can keep us stable, and we have been stable for 11,000 years. And so it's a huge responsibility. It requires huge amounts of action, but it is a purpose. It gives everybody, wherever they're working, purpose. So how do we engage the leadership in this? I think it's wrong to say that leaders aren't engaged. I think there is huge amount of leadership everywhere. There's European Green Deal. Biden administration have instigated huge changes. This is an absolute critical decade. The next 5 years is absolutely crucial. We do need to see big change there. And I suppose if we stay with Europe for a minute or two, this 5 years for the Green Deal is coming at a time where there are forces, populist leaders and far right leaders pushing against these agendas, which is going to make it trickier. But ultimately, I think that it goes down to the majority of people want change. So the issue, they accept that climate is changing, and they want more action on it. And it's about putting together agendas for that. I think at the moment, leaders where they have failed, it's where they have not put together fair agendas for fair transformations, where it's seen as unfair. And we were just talking about this, that people have an ethical, moral right to do it, but if it's not financially viable for them, if it's too expensive, then they will reject it. We need the right policies to make it financially viable, and I think that means greater wealth redistribution at quite a profound scale, to build the full momentum to drive the transformation.
Thanks, Owen. Deborah, I wonder if you can react to what Owen said. I think because one of the interesting parts and one of the challenging parts of this whole discussion is that countries, depending on where they are in the world, they'll have different economic needs and social needs, obviously. And so the way they may approach these issues may be vastly different, right? So how can we ensure that we foster sustainability in a way that's also equitable as well, given the different needs of countries?
Yes, thanks so much for bringing the debate back to the equity question, which I think is hugely important in this discussion. And it's not just differences between countries, but also within countries. Of course, we have a lot of inequality. And if those issues aren't tackled, then I don't think we can engage people from all specters of society into this discussion. In the OECD Trust Survey, for example, people were asked about what are the issues that they think are the most important public policy issues for them at the moment. And we have rising prices and inflation is number one. Then we have poverty, social inequality, crime, essential services, housing, unemployment, jobs, and then sustainability. I think these things are on the top of everyone's minds in their everyday lives. So it must be considered in any type of public debate that we have. I think we need to pick people up where they are. We need to understand what is their context, what are the concerns that people have, and try to turn the narrative around sustainability around also in the sense of what can it do for them? What is a desirable future that we want to move towards? So I think, don't have so much an awareness deficit nowadays. I think people are very much aware that climate change is happening, but we sometimes have an imagination deficit in terms of, how do we imagine the future that we want to reach? Why does it make sense for us? It's not just something around making individual sacrifices, but it's about imagining how can I be creative in my daily life and also in a way that is helpful for me, my family, my community, that it makes a positive difference. Some organizations speak now about not just about your carbon footprint, but also about your carbon handprint in terms of, what is the kind of impact that I want to make, always thinking about kind of positive goals that we want to move towards. And I think that narrative is important to engage young people, to make this less a story just of doom and gloom, but a story of futures thinking and of where the next generation wants to go.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And yes, I absolutely, this reimagining your future or positive thinking about your future, I think is also a good way to sustain interest as people enter the workforce, as they leave formal education into adolescence and beyond. So I've done a very poor job of timekeeping, but I want to give you all each a very quick last question. Maybe, Deborah, I'll start with you. What's one thing that you're optimistic about when it comes to this whole discussion?
I was really inspired. I think what I heard from Eden speaking about her students, and her eyes were just lighting up about, that energy that they have, and the young people, the things that they want to change and how they're seeking for solutions. So I think we need to start there. We need to pick that up. I'm optimistic about young people wanting to make a difference. But I think in terms of education policy, we need to be smart about how we tailor approaches to different age groups as well. So very, very young people, we can do a lot about connecting them to nature, engaging them with their immediate environment. As people get older in adolescence and beyond, it's more about making them understand the systemic issues behind it and trying to connect their local context to what is happening globally, understanding global issues as well.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Aideen, how about you?
Again, I think I would concur with that. When you first asked the question, that's what came into my mind. I suppose it's one thing I'm optimistic about is that we actually have what we need. But what we also need is to facilitate that to happen. So we have the will there from the majority of young people. We definitely have the skill set, the thinking, but I suppose to align with what Deborah said as well, it's to facilitate that to happen. And if anything, not to, perhaps I notice myself, the older I get, am I less likely to take risks or to think outside the box? Does that become curbed as a result of getting older? I don't know, but I would love to not let that happen for this generation and the next. For that risk. Someone mentioned the mistakes. We try and tell students as well, what's the biggest mistake you can make? And I think it's being afraid to make it in the first place. Let's make the mistakes, let's learn from them. But our hearts, their minds are in the right area. Let's give them what they need to make it happen. But I think we can trust them. And I think we are blessed, we are lucky with the with the upcoming generation. Thank you.
Thanks, Aideen. Owen, as a notable optimist, you get the last word. Tell us.
Oh, well, another notable optimist, maybe more notable than me, Dan Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on psychological biases. He's famously optimistic, and someone once asked him, why are you so optimistic? And he said, I'm optimistic because the future is created by optimists. And I think we have a duty to be optimistic for our children and for this generation. In many ways, it's the best time to be alive. We have all the solutions, which we never had before, for many of the world's global problems, from poverty, food security, population, and of course, sustainable energy.
Thanks so much. Well, that's a perfect note to end on. So thanks hugely to my panelists, to all of you who joined from around the world. Don't forget to download our new report. The link is in the chat. Check out some of the materials from the colleagues that are here in the panel today. And if you'd like to learn more about how things like climate change and technology are impacting education, don't forget to check out our launch of Trends Shaping Education on the 23rd. And please do follow us online for more webinars and interesting education content from the OECD. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.